I'm with the University of Virginia Institute for Environmental Negotiation, and EPA asked us to come in and help with the community involvement plan, and one of the recommendations from the people that we spoke with was that the CAG reconvene, and that was about a year ago, and now we're back to provide some facilitation support. What we'd like to do is thank everybody for participating. You can see that there's an ambitious agenda tonight. We will get through as much as we can. We don't want to rush discussion though, and we'll see, we'll take the temperature of the room. If there's a point where we need to decide whether to push forward or hold up just a little bit longer, we'll do that as a group. With that, I'd like to just take a few minutes and go around with the CAG and into the room to see who's here with us tonight.
Doug Roussillon, I think most of you know me here.
Robin Kennedy, Ringwood resident.
And Gretchen Samarco, Ringwood resident. Pretty good today.
Becca Toll, former mayor, Ringwood resident.
Lisa Chang, Ringwood resident.
Ken Petrone, New Jersey DEP, Country Manager.
Ron Birdsburg, DEP Community Relations.
Judy Zilkos, scientist at NYU Medical School.
Catherine Fetzi, prospective master's student at NYU Medical School.
Jerry Gradusky, Skio.
Joe Gowers, EPA Project Manager.
Pat Seppi, EPA Community Liaison.
Peter Sando, resident.
Tom White, Oakland resident. John Spear, Mayor of Ringwood.
Kirby Webster, Skio.
Ryan Bolton, Ringwood resident and councilman.
Neil Lubow, resident, 41 years.
Michelle Muska, NYU College of Global Health.
Scott Hick, resident, Borough Manager.
Colleen Liddell from Ford Motor Company.
Craig Coslet, the Maximus.
Looking at tonight's agenda, there's going to be a presentation on the remedial design report. There's going to be opportunity for questions and comments from everyone here about the remedial design for operating unit 2. And if at any point people are unclear or new to the process and need definitions, when you see something like OU2, let us know. Some response by Joe Gowers, and then a site update with progress reports, and again, opportunities for questions, comments. Going on to the next page, the Natural Resource Damage Program, presentation by Ken Petrone, another water issue on municipal wells, exception areas, governor's invitation to visit sites, questions regarding Ken's presentations, and the update on the NYU Health Study. And if we still have time, we'll talk a little bit about neutral facilitation at the end. And then the last item is a visit by Pete Lopez from Region 2, and then any closing comments and a preview for the next meeting. Is there anything that people expected to see that they don't see?
We have one change at the end of the agenda, which is my fault. The next meeting is actually May, what did I tell you it was? May 10th? Yeah. Okay, May 10th, not June 14th.
All right,
I was a month ahead there.
very good. Do you want to start that?
Yep. We're waiting for Vivian, but
Sherry, do you want to start your presentation?
Good evening. I'm really glad to be here in person. Last time we had our meeting, I was in there. So thank you for bearing with us then. I've been asked to talk about the final remedial design for operable unit 2. And this is our agenda. I'm just going to do a reminder about the CAS program. Very briefly mention the site background and then go into the remedial design report and the CAS comments. Hopefully everyone got to see that we did make a fact sheet, and my presentation is a lot of the information from that fact sheet. There are copies of the fact sheet at the front.
And the presentation.
there are copies of, and the presentation, so if you need a copy, please get one. So I'll move on to task. And SKIO, the company that Kirby and I work for, has the contract with EPA to provide technical assistance services for communities, and that's what TASK stands for. So we're funded by EPA, but we're funded to be non-advocacy and independent technical assistance. So that's how the program works. Does anybody have any questions about TASK? I know you've heard about it a couple of times. So I think everybody knows about the site, that it's 500 acres, that there are 3 operable units, that operable unit 1 was meant to address the whole site, and then later operable units 2 and 3 were added. We're talking about the remedial design report for operable unit 2, which includes 3 land areas of concern. And last time we were talking about the groundwater, which was operable unit 3. And this is a map that just outlines the site and shows the locations of those 3 land areas that we're talking about for the remedial design. If anybody has questions, feel free to stop me. I'm just going kind of fast because I think this is a lot of information that you've already heard. I did want to spend a minute talking about the Superfund process, just to make sure that everyone realizes that when the operable units are formed, then they can go through the Superfund process at different rates. So for the whole site, everything started with a preliminary assessment site investigation, and then there was a public comment period. The site got put on the national priorities list. And then operable unit 3, as I said, we talked about it last time I was here. That's in the remedial investigation feasibility study phase. So sometime in the near future, there should be a feasibility study. Operable unit 2 that we're talking about now has already been through all of that, and there's a record of decision that has been signed. A record of decision is a legally binding document that says how will the remediation be conducted. So it sets out the requirements for the remedial design. The remedial design needs to meet the requirements of the ROD. And so that's where we are now with operable unit 2. After the remedial design, then of course there will be the construction of the remedy, and then post-construction monitoring, maintenance. And sometime in the future, the site could be delisted, and at that time, if it's ever proposed to be taken off the national priority list, there would be another public comment period. The ROD for OU2 was signed in 2014, and then there was an explanation of significant difference in 2015, and that was the explanation that instead of excavating the O'Connor disposal area, a recycling center would be put over the cap of the O'Connor disposal area. So moving forward, now that we have a final remedial design, any fundamental change to the remedy would require a ROD amendment, and any significant change would require another explanation of significant difference. Any questions about the Superfund process and OU2? All right, I'll move on. So I'm following the summary, the written fact sheet fairly closely with my presentation. There are 8 chapters to the report, and I'll briefly mention each chapter. I think I will. So the remedial design follows an EPA-approved work plan. The first chapter is the introduction. It explains that there was an approved work plan. It explains also that there was a preliminary remedial design that was also approved by EPA, and the remedial design includes comments made by EPA. So we're, to get to a final remedial design, there's been a lot of work on it already. Chapter 2 goes through the background of the site and explains the 2014 ROD for the 3 areas of concern. That's the Cannon Mine Pit area, the O'Connor Disposal area, and the Peters Mine Pit area. So in Chapter 2, the requirements of the ROD are explained, and I've just put those on this on 3 different slides for each of the 3 areas so that you can see what the ROD says the remedial design should cover. And so if there are any drums and waste in the Cannon Mid-Pine area, can't talk, the CMP area, then they would be disposed of. The area would be graded for proper drainage, and then a permeable engineered cap, a geotextile, and the soil cap over that would be placed over the site. Permeable means that it's not a cap meant to keep rainwater from percolating down through the material. It does allow rainwater to go through it. It's not an impermeable cap. Then there would be engineering controls, boulders, fences, control of access to the area, institutional controls, maintenance, monitoring.
So,
Yes.
so it's interesting that you call fencing an engineering control. What is the engineering? Or putting boulders out?
Well, you can define a physical control as an engineered control. It doesn't necessarily have to be high-tech, but think of it more as a physical control versus an institutional control is more of a rule or a regulation.
So it's just stringing physical access.
Yeah. Any other questions? So for the OCDA area, there would be excavation of the fringe, around the fringe, and that would be consolidated under the cap. There would be the same textile soil permeable cap, similar to what would be put into the CMP area. Then it's being ready for the recycling center to be constructed on top of the cap. The recycling center becomes part of the remedy. And then, of course, there are also physical controls, such as fencing and control of access. Vegetation where the fringe area has been excavated would be, they would restore the vegetation, restore and mitigate any damage to surrounding wetlands, and then again the institutional controls that might be needed for maintenance and monitoring. And the Peters Mine Pit area requirements. They would excavate soil and fill to the water table. They would remove any drums or waste that are found, and if drums of waste are found below the water table, it's feasible, those are directed, the ROD directs those to be removed. And then you would, there would be a fill added to achieve the grades that are needed. And then again, that area would be capped. There would be access control and institutional controls. So this chapter of the remedial design, as I said, covers the background, and it explains what the record of decision requires. Chapter 3 covers pre-design sampling that was done. So this is sampling that was done in order to write the record of decision, the remedial design. Sorry. So one thing that was done was landfill gas testing in the 3 areas. There was excavation of some test trenches in areas where there were data gaps and more data was needed. Some test borings in the PMP area were completed. to characterize the soil and fill that is going to be excavated from those areas. And then there was a geotechnical investigation to develop the foundation requirements for the recycling center. So those are the pre-design activities. And then chapter 4 goes through the basis of design, and there are a lot of drawings in the remedial design that go into a lot of detail of the excavation and the grading and where things will be. And so it really covers each of the various components of excavation, capping, drainage, landfill gas management, all those components for each of the different areas. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to try to go through those in any detail here, but when we get into the task comments, we'll come back and talk about some of these a little bit more. Chapter 5 talks about the interim groundwater and surface water monitoring. And so there is a plan in the remedial design to monitor groundwater until OU3, that remediation decision is made, and that whatever is decided for OU3 is put into place. So this is, interim is important. It's not forever. It's until there's a remedy for OU3. So certain existing groundwater monitoring wells, and I wanted to point out, I didn't put it into the slides, but on page 8 of the fact sheet, there's a table that shows, lists which groundwater wells have been flagged for the interim groundwater monitoring. There are 3 deep water wells in the CPM area, and 4 overburden wells and 1 deep water well in the OCDA area. 5 overburden wells, 8 deeper groundwater wells in the PMP area, and 2 surface water seeps in the PMP area. So that information is in the fact sheet if you want to look at it later. And that's what the report is recommending for interim groundwater sampling locations and surface water sampling locations. The report is saying that groundwater and surface water will be sampled twice a year in the CMP and the OCDA areas, and quarterly for the first year in the PMP area. That's because the data sets for the 1,4-dioxane in the groundwater, which was more recently found, are not as robust, and so taking more groundwater samples will help make that data set more robust.
How long will you continue to test for 1,4-dioxane? Is it twice per year after the first year? And
Well,
for how long?
The remedial design is saying that the interim groundwater monitoring will continue until a decision is made for the site-wide groundwater for OU3. So I would expect it to be a few years. I'm not EPA, so I don't know how long that will take until you get to a decision for the groundwater. But once a decision is made for the site-wide groundwater, then new decisions would be made, and so this program would be ended, and something that's decided specifically for groundwater, I would expect would be started. And Joe, did you?
I mean,
want to add?
basically, I mean, you're correct. I mean, this is an interim program. This will require a certain frequency of monitoring up until not just that the remedy for the groundwater is selected, but once that remedy starts, that remedy is put into place. Once that's implemented, then that will have its own groundwater requirements associated with that record of decision. So there's going to be sort of like continuity of groundwater sampling here for quite some time.
So will that be based on concentrations of dioxane or chemicals that you might find? Will that new, the new testing protocol, the new paradigm, will that be based at all on what you find? And
Well, the sampling that will be put into the groundwater upflow unit record of decision is going to be based upon the groundwater data that we're collecting currently. They'll likely, I can say, there will be sentinel wells installed also to make sure we keep an eye on the extent of the groundwater contamination related to the Peters Mine area. So it's all going to be based upon the current data set we're collecting.
Chapter 6 of the report talks about permits and approvals, and federal, state, and local permits are not required for Superfund sites, but there is a requirement that applicable, relevant, appropriate requirements, ARARs, must be met, and those are federal, state, and local regulations that might apply to the site. So in New Jersey, the Department of Environmental Protection assesses ARARs and goes through a permit equivalent process, and some of those approvals and those plans are in that chapter. And Chapter 7 has a schedule for the construction of the remedy, and the dates are off. We're way past when they had hoped to have this done, but it looks like if you look at the dates, maybe they're expecting the construction of the remedy would take somewhat more than 2 years to complete. If anybody has better information about that, feel free to speak up. Anything about the summary of the site background? Like I said, the fact sheet has a little more information in it. If you have questions later, I'm sure you can come back and ask those.
Terry,
Yes.
When you had that graphic of the Superfund process, and one of the final steps is the possibility of deletion from the as being a Superfund, with O'Connor, where they're not going to remove whatever toxic waste is left, they're just going to cover it up. Is there ever a likelihood that they would delist a site that continues to have toxins on it, even though it's covered, it's still there?
I'd like to tack on to that. Would it then be considered, like on the books, as a brownfield site as well?
Because if they're not cleaning it out, they're just tidying it up and covering it up, it's still there. Don't we want that to be monitored in perpetuity? And want the EPA to have an involvement forever?
Well, first, I can say that if this site ever reaches the point where EPA says, you know, we think it's ready to be delisted, and it's possible that it could be delisted if, like, it's very stable for a long, long time. If that point is reached, then there would be a public comment, there would be notices, and there would be a public comment period. So there would be discussion with the community about that possibility. So it's hard for me to say, oh, that would never happen, or yes, someday in the far future, for sure that will happen. But there's a process for that to be brought to the community and for the discussion to happen before it could be delisted.
But the monitoring will never end. It could be delisted, but the monitoring will never end.
Thank you. That's kind of what I was looking for.
Could I just ask a question about percolation? You're talking about with the cap. Could you explain that process, what occurs?
Well, there are different types of covers that you can put over contaminated waste, and so if you, a typical landfill cap will be more clay-like soils, or sometimes over waste you can even put a synthetic barrier that, and both the clay, tight clay cap or a synthetic barrier would prevent rainwater, not maybe 100% prevent it, but would greatly reduce the amount of rainwater that could be absorbed. That could percolate down through the particles of soil, down through the waste, and finally at some point reach the groundwater. So that's one type of cap. These caps that are going to be put on these sites are not those types of caps. They're permeable caps, meaning they're meant, the purpose of the cap is to keep people from coming in contact with contaminants in the soil underneath. They're not meant for reduction of rainwater percolating through.
So wouldn't the rainwater be able to go right through the cap into the toxic material and maybe perhaps drain into the groundwater? It doesn't make ignorant of this, but you know, it seems to be common sense that you're not really protecting that toxic material that's being left there.
They are permeable caps.
Yeah.
That's what the report says. So they're not meant to keep the rainwater out.
Right. Okay.
Once the rod is completed for OU3 with the groundwater, might that recommendation be overridden? Might they decide, once they've evaluated the site groundwater situation, that that's not the right kind of a cap for this area? Is that possible?
I suppose it's possible, but typically EPA would look ahead to see if it was likely, because you wouldn't want to put on a cap and then say, oh, now we have to go back and put on a different type of cap. So I certainly would not expect that to happen, but until the remedial investigation and the feasibility study and the preferred plan is out, I would say, you know, there are possibilities. Joe,
but basically, when we select a remedy, we're always looking at the data. There's new data which shows us that a remedy is no longer protective. Then we would have to go back and amend the record decision to put in place a protective remedy. But at this point, the groundwater data is still similar to what we've seen beforehand. So I mean, we see nothing at this point which would make us want to go back and revise or amend the remedies that have been selected for Operating Unit 2.
Thanks.
Keep in mind also that, like in Peter's Mine Pit, 99% of the trash is in water already. It's in the groundwater. Because the water table's up where the pond level is, so most of it is consumed by water right now, it's sitting in water. So.
We're going to take a cue, so Doug, Venka, and then Julie.
Well, first, quickly, could we just address the permeable thing? With this design, is it possible that the rainwater would carry the contaminants through the permeable cap into the groundwater?
Well, I mean, clearly, water will percolate through the cap, but the reason that type of cap was selected is because we're not seeing leaching of contaminants from materials that are on the site at present. We're not seeing high levels of contaminants entering the groundwater from the fill material. And that's one of the reasons why a permeable cap was selected. We're primarily concerned with people coming into contact with anything that's left behind. There might be some limited amounts of, you know, paint sludge and so forth. And it's basically just to cut off that potential.
Okay. And with this long-term testing, I know we've spoken about it before, but saying how it's practically going to be indefinite, the duration of this testing. It'll be for a long time.
It'll be there as long as the cap is in place.
Okay. And if that's the case, and I think we've gone over it before, I just want a reminder, where does that funding come from?
Hopefully the potentially responsible parties will sign on to an enforcement agreement to conduct this remedy and to maintain it forever, essentially.
Would those funds that are paying for the testing and this long-term monitoring, would that be coming out of a municipal budget, or is that covered by insurance companies that are covering this? Yeah, either Mr. Spear or Mr. Heck, would you guys know? Sorry, I thought.
I think that would be subject to an agreement between the borough and Ford as both the potentially responsible parties. It would come to that agreement, and the insurance companies would be, would be on board with any kind of agreement about spending money going forward.
Okay, so would it be coming out of the municipal budget then, long term?
If there's any way to prevent that, we would not. That is not a preferable solution.
Thank you. And now, also, just real quick, the refinement of boundary that we were talking about for OCDA, consolidating some of that fringe area, as you referred to it, into the cap. Now, what if once the cap is constructed, more sludge or contaminated soil or fill pops up that is outside, outside the cap? Depending on the nature of it, would it be disposed of off-site?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's something, we get new information after a remedy is selected or a remedy is implemented, which indicates that there's some sort of threat there, new contaminants found, they would have to be addressed.
And then that addressing, if that was the case, that would then fall under the umbrella of the agreement that would be signed by potential responsible parties. Because I'm thinking down the line, if they sign an agreement detailing costs, but we're under the impression that there's, everything is underneath that cap.
We would expect that the potential responsible parties would address that.
Okay. Thank you, that's all I had.
Yeah, the technical report here suggests that the EPA install deeper wells down gradient of O'Connor because the wells that you have there are pretty shallow. Are you contemplating that?
Are we contemplating?
Installing deeper?
Well, it's, we're going to get into this later, but essentially, we anticipate when we look at, for instance, the groundwater operable unit, the installation of additional sentinel monitoring wells. I mean, they're going to be part of the alternatives that are essentially evaluated in the feasibility study.
But that'll happen after the cap is installed.
That is correct. Because I mean, that again, you're dealing with groundwater,
Right.
groundwater operable unit.
And what we're getting into and about to, I think, flow into with the presentation is that beyond the summary for the remedial design report, which is available on the website, I'm looking at it right now under technical report, so if you want to read the whole thing, it's posted. The SKIO, as part of its technical services, also provided some comments after reviewing it, and I think Terry's about to present those because Becca just touched on that. And before we do, did you have?
My question was answered, thank you.
Okay, very good.
And so the last few pages of our fact sheet includes our task technical comments and the reasons for those comments. And I'm putting most of those in the slides, not every single one, but I'll go over the ones that I have in the slides. One thing that you have to know is that, SKIO comes in, we read the document, the remedial design, we look back at the remedial investigation, feasibility study, we're gathering information, but you all have been here for a long time. The PRPs have been working the site, the state, EPA, so probably everybody in the room has quite a bit more information and background than we do. So we're really looking at it, trying to look at it with fresh eyes, an independent look with our technical folks to facilitate conversation. And so that's what we are hoping our comments will do, is facilitate conversation and get everybody on a common understanding.
Before you start, can I ask a question? So, task, I understand from you what it is and all. Who are the experts in task that are reviewing this impartially? What is the background of the experts?
I was one of the reviewers. I'm my undergraduate's in chemical engineering, my master's is in environmental engineering, and I've been working with communities on Superfund sites since 1989.
So are you the only reviewer?
And then I worked for this site, I worked with a hydrogeologist, Jill Bilius at SKIO.
So there's no toxicology?
We did not have a toxicologist look at it, no. So we had those two reviewers. So when we looked at the pre-designed sampling with the test pits, in 3 of them, kind of along the southern border of the PMP area, there were higher levels of arsenic, but no other waste was found, and so the decision in the remedial design report was the boundaries were fine and did not need to be adjusted. The community may want to ask EPA to take a look at that and further consider if the higher arsenic might be an indication of waste or contamination. I mean, you could really argue both sides of that issue. It's like, well, it's higher than background, so why is it there? So that is one comment that we have.
So, I'm sorry, so when you talk about the arsenic level, are you talking about the US EPA standard, the New Jersey standard, the WHO standard? What can you say about?
About the New Jersey Residential Direct Contact Soil Remediation Standard. So when we're talking about the soil standard, it's the New Jersey Direct Contact Soil Remediation Standard.
So those are regulatory guidelines?
Right, they're screening, they're levels, regulatory levels.
Can you recall what that is?
I'm sorry.
What that level is? I've never heard of it before. Go ahead.
20 parts per million?
Yeah, 20 parts per million.
So,
Yeah, got it.
And then we've kind of covered this already, but I know the community really cares about groundwater, and you may want to have further discussion with EPA. It's like, could the design be changed in any way, or should it to help protect the migration of contaminants to groundwater? And as Joe was saying, you know, when we looked at it too, especially around the ODCA, we didn't see that there was gross groundwater contamination. You know, there was no plume. And it's been you know, the contaminants have been there for a long time. So, but again, questions are good. Also, the 1,4-dioxane is a rather recent find, so would more aggressive groundwater protection possibly keep any of that from going into the groundwater? It's a question. That might benefit from some further discussion. I think we talked about this in our last presentation, but the CMP area remedy will require some work around Van Duck Lane cul-de-sac. A lot of communities that we work with when it comes to traffic and access to private properties, they want more information. So if anybody wants more information about, well, what's that going to look like, or the timing, that would be good information to request more details for. Our hydrogeologist was concerned that stormwater runoff during the remedy construction could carry contaminated soil into the OCDA sediment basin, and then possibly from the basin into a discharge area that is a newly established flat area next to Park Brook. And so that might be something you'd like EPA to look at and maybe discuss further with you, that whether there is any possibility that contaminants could be redistributed or reach Park Brook from that possible flow pattern. Yes.
We're here, right? Site preparation?
Yes.
All right. For more information about the planned work for the traffic and access and
Yes.
everything, do they have like a map or something laid out as to how they plan on doing this cul-de-sac and everything?
I do not recall seeing it. Is there a map in the remedial design?
There is a map showing where they plan to do the excavation and where they intend to essentially relocate that cul-de-sac.
And
The plan is to create a temporary cul-de-sac a little bit further to, I guess, would be
I kind of
South.
remember part of that
Yeah,
conversation, but,
yeah.
you know, I'd like to have to see the layout of the plan.
Yeah, there are drawings associated with the RIO design report, which lay out the proposal there.
Was that in that big cornerstone environmental booklet that,
It'll be the cornerstone.
the most recent one that was
The
like?
RD report, yeah.
Yeah.
There's figures associated with that, or drawings, which will.
So that would be in there,
It'll
right?
be
Yeah,
in there.
Vivian, I have that, I'll give that to you.
Well, I was gonna ask, 'cause I'd like to have a copy, you know, of that, so that I can look at it.
And what also might be.
I'm sorry, I don't know who you are.
Oh, I'm Terry Boguski with SKIO. I'm the task
All right.
technical
Nice to meet
advisor.
Terry was the voice we heard last time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was the voice. If you're highly interested in that, what also might be helpful is the folks from the state were in the area today, and we actually saw them in the cul-de-sac, and they were pointing out to us where the remediation was going to happen in the area where the cul-de-sac. So you might see if maybe somebody could walk through it with you at some point in the future. That might be a suggestion, to see it in real life versus on a piece of paper and
Oh, I'd like
drawing.
to see it real like that.
Was there a mention last time, is that a bus stop?
By bus stop, they're talking about one at the very end at the top of, for the cul-de-sac remediation. Bus stop's down below at the corner of Milligan and down. But there is a concern still with a lot of children and everything, you know, it's going to be questions about that, so.
We didn't see in the report, I'm moving on to the next bullet. We didn't see in the report how the success of the excavations would be confirmed, and the way the excavations are confirmed from the sites that I've worked at is sometimes they do enough testing in advance, so then they can set, they can just say, this is where the excavation is going to be. It'll be this wide, this long, and this deep, because all of our testing shows that's what we need. So that's one way. Another way is to dig it out and then test the sides and the bottoms of the excavation and say, okay, we need to, have we got all the contamination, or do we need to make this hole bigger? So you might want some information about what are the performance standards for the excavations.
And who handles that? You?
Yeah, I mean, the way this works, SKIO's providing the comments to you. You can then provide those comments to us as you did the groundwater RI addendum comments, and then we would address those or try to address those comments.
Vivian, I just want to interject. Liz is videoing, and
Okay.
she said to me that you got to speak up.
Oh, sorry, and I'm trying to be so nice, you know, and African, you know.
Use your outdoor voice,
Yeah,
not
you
your
can.
indoor voice.
All right.
Yeah, and as Joe said, in case I didn't say it when I started talking about the task comments, we're providing information to you, the community. We don't provide comments to EPA, so if you don't want to follow through on any of this information, that's, you live here and it's your community, that's your prerogative. So Joe will respond to you and not to me. In the PMP area, they're expecting to dewater during the excavations, and the dewatering waters will be treated through a temporary treatment system where it will be filtered and run through granulated activated carbon and then discharged back to groundwater. But granulated activated carbon is not a treatment for 1,4-dioxane. So you may want to discuss with EPA how will the treated dewatered water be tested for the chemicals of potential concern. That might be something you might want to ask for.
Well, I just want to see this really, I really want to see how this is going to work. So, yeah, all right.
area designated for use as the PMP area detention pond after the remedy's completed is also the area that's going to be used for storage and recharge of dewatering waters. And so using, our hydrogeologist had actually pointed this out, that using the detention pond for this purpose could allow contaminated groundwater to be discharged to another location, which typically is not allowed. So you may want to ask EPA, what steps are going to be taken to prevent contaminated groundwater from being discharged from the detention pond into another location. And that kind of goes with the previous comment, like if you're treating and testing the water and there are no contaminants in it, then this comment kind of goes away.
All right, sorry, pause. As you're dewatering, then you're going to tell me you're going to bring it out of Peter's mine pit, and you're going to, where you have that across the street, is that where you're going to put it?
Well, no, I mean, basically, essentially, as far as dewatering here, it's going to be primarily the Peters Mine pit because the work's going to be done essentially in the water or near the water. There's a pond, obviously, standing in there. Now, I need to point out, first of all, that the sampling that we've done of the water in that pond it's essentially been clean. We haven't been finding a lot of contaminants in the water itself within the pit. But what they're intending to do is, as they're excavating, a lot of the water is just simply going to be moved around within the pit itself. If they're working on one area of the pit and they need to go below the water table, they'll pump it. As an extra precaution, then we're going to run it through treatment and then just discharge it into essentially another area of the pit. There's also the option where there's this detention pond, which is going to be built right next to the Peters Mine pit area, where they may put some of that water into that detention pond.
Yes, 'cause this is totally confusing me, because I don't understand. You're going to be right there at Peter's mine pit. You're going to do this section.
Yes.
So what's stopping, then you say you're going to put some right there in the same pit?
Yeah, basically, and it's been done before, and what they can do is they can pump down one area of the pit and then essentially have a hole and basically dig it in another part of the pit and discharge it there. And as long as they're pumping enough water from the one area where they're doing the excavation, they can control water re-infiltrating into that area.
I am definitely curious to see this,
Joe, was the sediment tested in the water too? Because any sediment kind of stirred up from the sides of the bottom?
Well, any sediment is going to be, again, I mean, it's going to remain within the area that's going to be capped.
So you're pumping and testing. You're testing the water as you're pumping.
Well, no, the intent here is not to test. It's basically to pump, run it through a treatment system, and then discharge all within the same.
So you're going to treat the water without testing it.
That was the intention.
And this is shallow water, right?
This is shallow water, which you
people
keep
need
in
to
mind.
understand you're not going into the
Keep in mind this water's been sampled before, and
Yeah.
we're really not finding anything in this water.
Right, but it's shallow.
Yes.
It's not where the sludge is.
No, it's shallow. It's
Yeah.
going to be shallow water, the water that we're going to be essentially encountering when they're doing the work in the collar.
I guess we definitely need to know whether or not it's contaminated because you're going to put it back in the ground. I mean, even though you're saying, Ken?
They need a permit equivalent from the state to do that. So our geologists have looked at that and have given them specific instructions on how they have to do it.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about what
And
are...
speak up just a
I'm
little.
sorry. Can I ask a question about what are, you said you tested for and have you found it? Can you just give me or direct me to a site that I can see what was tested for?
Sure, you can look at the RI report. All the data is summarized in the remedial investigation report and the addendum to the report, which has recently been prepared.
So these are both organics and metals?
Basically, that's what we test for at the site. We test for organics and metals.
Is there pretty comprehensive testing done? I'm not asking you to...
No. I mean, that generally what we do is, here, I mean, we're basically, we test for a large range of organic and inorganic compounds.
Can I get that offline later?
Yeah, it's online. It's on our
online
page.
on the webpage.
You can go to our webpage and download the stuff.
One more, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but are you making the assumption that there's no 1,4-dioxane in that shallow water? Because can that really be treated?
The 1,4-dioxane, with carbon, it's questionable.
Yeah.
They've used it as a polishing step at some sites to varying degrees of effectiveness. It might be able to remove some low levels of organics or 1,4-dioxane, but it's really not that effective.
And as of right now, you're saying you haven't found 1,4-dioxane in the shallow water?
What we're saying is basically the water within the pit itself we sampled, and my recollection was that water has been pretty much coming up without levels of organics in that water. I mean, we are of course seeing it in the deeper water related to the air shaft and water coming off that air shaft.
So what's really happening is we're permitting them to take the shallow water out temporarily and then just put it back into the same spot. So there's not any kind of new, even if it is contaminated, it's going right back to where it was at the same levels or better because it's going through carbon first. So it's not contaminating any new or clean areas if it is contaminated. It's just the same water that can temporarily remove and then discharge back into the groundwater. It's called a discharge to groundwater permit. So they're not taking it and moving it somewhere else and discharging it. It's all just recycling right in the same area.
I have a question about the detention pond. Are you using a liner? And if so, what is the composition of that liner?
I don't believe there's a liner in the detention.
Really? So you're aware of all the things that happen in fracking detention ponds and all the other detention ponds that are supposed to collect, that there's a permeation into the soil. If there's an accident or a breach, even with a pond, so even with
Okay,
a liner,
but here,
there's no
basically,
liner.
the detention pond here is basically going to be used to control the runoff of clean water, essentially.
I'm sorry. I thought you said you were going to take the water and whatever contaminants might be there, and you're going to drain it.
Well, they're talking about temporarily using that area for, yeah, but when the remedy is all constructed, the intent of that pond is basically to control surface water runoff. Because you're basically, we're reducing essentially the amount of surface water that area can handle because you're putting a cap on it. Right now there's a pond there, so we need to sort of compensate for that, and that's what the idea of the detention pond is. I mean, you'll see.
Right, but
You'll see when you.
I think that there's a question because at one point, and maybe it wasn't, maybe there's a misunderstanding, but what I thought I heard is that the water would be taken out of the shallow areas of the pit and either put back into the pit or possibly use the detention pond to temporarily hold that.
Yes, in that area when the remedy is being constructed, but once that remedy is constructed, it becomes a detention pond, which is going to be used to control surface water runoff off that cap.
all I'm saying is that if there are contaminants in there, in the detention pond,
And the water going into the detention
the
pond.
water going into, thank you, the water going into the detention pond, you can.
Yeah,
separate-
but again, everything staying in the same general area as Ken had indicated. You basically, there's a permit by rule being issued. You're basically taking water out, running it through the treatment system, and putting it right back into the ground.
So if it were to leach through this detention pond at some point, it would just be leaching into the already contaminated
It's going back where
area.
it came from, essentially. Yeah, I mean, and that's what we're trying to say. Is basically, it's being temporarily
Misplaced.
pumped up
Yeah.
so that they can do their work. It's being run, going through the extra step, being run through a treatment system to try to remove if there's any little bits of organics there, will get taken out by the treatment system, and then it's being put back into the same ground.
Yeah, but 1,4-dioxane can't be taken out though. It's in there.
Again, it's been used as a polishing step. It can possibly take out some of the 1,4-dioxane. It's not very effective generally, but still, it's better than nothing. So, I mean, again, but again, you're missing the point that you're basically taking the same water and putting it back where.
No, I was just clarifying.
the question in back and what I think you're saying is that more or less the pit, well, that the pit and the detention pond together are a closed system, so anything that went into the discharge area would go back into the area of the...
It's going back into the same aquifer right there,
All
yeah,
right.
the same area of the aquifer.
And then you're assuming that when you do the groundwater rod, that you're going to be taking care of that water.
Well, yes, the groundwater rod will address any...
The contamination that's
meant to
there.
address any sort of groundwater contamination that needs to be addressed.
And we have a question in the back.
That was just going to be my clarification, that it probably feels confusing because we're talking about water, but we're treating the soil. So treating the water during the soil part of the remedy isn't the primary objective, but it does feel disconnected to talk about taking something out and not treating it, but treating it is coming later as part of OU3.
Thanks for highlighting that. It's the managing of water and the treatment of the soil. That was an excellent clarification point.
I'm going to go home now.
Take a cookie on the way out.
And Joe, just to follow up, I don't know if you have any information about why, since you're taking the water out and putting it back in, why is it being treated? Like, what's the overriding reason for treating it?
Well, I mean, again, that's just an extra step to essentially try to remove whatever we can from the water before it is put back in.
Any other questions about the dewatering and treatment?
Do you have any idea when you think you plan to try to start this?
Oh, start the construction? Well, again, it depends on a number of factors. At this point, I wouldn't expect construction to start till sometime next year.
Because that's when I'll have my questions. I really want to see this, you know? I mean, like, so.
Can I ask a question going back to O'Connor? So how are you going to be protecting the park brook, which is so close, when you're going to be moving all this contaminated dirt?
Yeah, and that's why if you look at the design, I mean, typically, whenever we're moving, contaminated, we're moving dirt and doing soils work there's usually barriers put in place. What we usually use is we use silt fencing and hay bales to try to keep the sediment from running off. But because of the amount of runoff that you could potentially be dealing with the size of the area in the O'Connor disposal area, there's an added sediment control. There's a sediment basin being put in, a large basin where the water would be directed and run off. Basically, it goes into the basin. The sediment is designed so the sediment settles out, and then the water can basically run off. So it's a way of trying to keep the soils in the area where we're working, and that is designed to help protect the park brook.
Okay. Now, if you were excavating the contamination, what would you be doing?
We would still be putting up you would still have the hay bales, you would still have the silt fencing.
So it's pretty much the same
area.
Yeah. If you were excavating, you'd be getting rid of the
stuff.
stuff.
We would still need to have controls in place to try to minimize the runoff of any of that soil or fill into the park brook.
That's why it doesn't make sense to really do all that work by the park brook and the detention basin, et cetera, and leaving all that contamination there. It's just contraindicated, but anyway. You're still hoping you're going to change your mind.
The remedial design report does talk about dust control measures, including spraying water, removing dried soil from land and roadway surfaces, putting covers or tarping over soil piles to reduce dust. And visible dust leaving the site is prohibited. We didn't see any mention of monitoring, if there's going to be any dust or VOC monitoring, and so you might want to ask about what levels of dust or VOCs in air would trigger actions, and if an action is triggered, what would that action be? We just didn't see any specifics in the report.
You are going to cover that, though. I think you said at one of the last meetings. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the issues here is that once this design report is prepared, And then that design report gets taken and goes to the remedial action contractor, and they develop their own plans based upon that, including things like health and safety plans and so forth.
And we'll see that in a later.
That's what we expect to see in the later phase.
Health and safety plans, like, that was actually gonna be a question of mine. I always,
For every project, there'll be a health and safety plan detailing the types of monitoring that would need to be conducted to protect both the workers and the community.
I always reference that instance that happened like a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, down the mountain in Pompton Lakes, where they were dredging the lake down there from all the contamination, and it was like a Friday, and the next day it was raining, or maybe it was during the same week, I'm not sure, but they left the soil uncovered that they were dredging out, and it started to rain, and the rain was obviously taking that contaminated lake soil that was all dredged out and, you know, bringing it right back into the waterway, and they were able to see a stream of this water. They had pictures of it. So someone is walking by near the Superfund site in Ringwood while the work's going on, and there's uncovered soil, God forbid. What would we do? Are we able to like call the police? Could we take our own tarp and cover it for the time being until the proper contractors
No,
get
I
there?
mean, basically, there's a hotline that you can contact, or you can obviously, if it's work hours, you can contact me, contact EPA, and we can make sure that that issue's addressed. We shouldn't see that. I mean, basically, at the end of the day, there should be some sort of containment also around any of the piles that are left in place.
Joe, do the workers work in hazmat suits?
It's going to basically depend upon the work that's being done. I mean, you might see, it depends upon the level. You know, if you're in an area where they're essentially excavating paint sludge or something like that, you might see protective gear and respirator, depending upon the levels that you're seeing. But generally, the most you're probably going to see is like a tie-dye suit. It's like the white suits that they wear to basically keep soil and so forth off of them.
Just to further address your question, at some of the sites where I've worked, they've put like the hotline number up by the, you know, the entry gates to the site, or places where the community person walking by could say, oh, I should call that number. So that also might be a possibility.
Right, we always do that at our site, so there would be a sign with a number.
Yeah.
I have another question, sorry. Going back, just in the summary, I had asked you and you responded, but I wanted to ask Joe. You know, in the groundwater, it says that the groundwater in you lump together the OU3 with St. George's Pit. Now, I know that's been investigated, and I know there's benzene there, maybe not at high levels. So is that totally off the table? Nothing's going to happen there?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we've done sampling there. We didn't find much in the area, but because we've done work and looked at the area, I think the thinking is that our record of decision might have to sort of close that area out also, and we would incorporate that area into the OU3.
Okay.
The St. George Pit area.
St. George Pit area.
And what prompted that implementation of including the St. George Pit in OU3? Or at least...
Well, I mean, the reason we investigated is because there was concern raised by the community for that area, even though it had been previously investigated. So we went back, because it was a known fill area, and actually did more investigatory work in that area back in, I think, 2010, 2011.
There was thought that maybe there'd be sludge there.
Yeah, exactly. And what we basically found was municipal garbage.
Yeah, yeah. But there are low-grade levels of benzene in the groundwater there. That's what I read anyway.
Well, I mean, we did do sampling there, and we really, again, we didn't find much concern in that area.
It's not totally not there. It's there, but not at high levels.
Well, I know there's some levels down in the seep also outside that area.
So St. George, you're referring to, is that at the top of Van Lane? Which is the New London Pit?
No. New London Pit is at the other end of it.
It's Wayne Vans and the
where Wayne Mann used to live,
Across the road
basically
there?
across the road there.
It goes all the way down to the next road, right? That whole area.
It goes, basically the area
Peter's Mine.
down towards Canamine
Right.
Road.
All right, so
So
what
it's
do you
right
call
on
that?
the
What do you call that
Yeah,
pit?
it's near the playground.
St. George?
Yeah.
So, where our Wayne Man there, all right,
Yes.
St. George, okay, so New London's over on Van Dunn Plain, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, New
So
London.
St. George was basically on what we used to know as pipeline, all right, which doesn't exist anymore. So, you're gonna do work there too?
No, we're not, I mean, there's no intention to do work there. What we're saying is, we investigated that area, and we're likely going to address that and sort of close that out in the next record decision.
So that's the area where we found sludge. And then by the time we got back there in the afternoon, it was all removed from the surface. So-
You're talking about that little
Yeah, I'm
culvert at near the bottom of
Yeah,
the
at the
line,
bottom
yeah.
of St.
Well,
George.
it was a pretty thorough investigation done after that in 2010 in the pit above that area, and there was no sludge found.
The St. George pit area that you're referencing, near Wayne's old house, at the end of that cul-de-sac, right?
Yes.
So, there's also that water tower there, right? Which sits way on top,
Yeah, that's
though.
further
It
down.
sits-
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so then, there's suspected to be sludge over there?
There was
There was.
concern, I mean, basically there was a chunk of paint sludge that was found at the bottom of that area down near Canamine Road. There's a little culvert there.
Yeah.
There was some concern raised, I believe it was by Bob Spiegel and Rich Chapin, about some other materials that might have been found there also.
Drums?
It's been years now, but, and that prompted another investigation to be conducted in that area. There was some limited investigation done previously. So there was a thorough, direct push sampler investigation done within the St. George's pit area back in late 2010, early 2011, I think it was.
And, okay. And so but it's still going to be included in OU3? so
Well,
it's
yeah,
still-
basically, we're going to address it. We're going to basically, the record digital will say, we looked at the area, sampling was done, we didn't find much.
Okay.
Nothing's going to be done to that area. That's basically what we're envisioning.
Oh, okay. And this is where those old railroad tracks are too, correct?
The railroad tracks are, would be, I guess, further to the west, would that be? Up the hillside.
Yes, up the hillside. Okay. What, close where the recycling center is now?
Where's the railroad tracks at?
No, those really old, small railroad tracks past the water tower, up the hill from the recycling center. The very small railroad tracks, and you can see the electrical towers that used to be there too, way back when.
All right, well, you're jumping me from up by recycling, from down by what they call can mine, you know, up to.
Yeah, but basically, the area we're talking about is, where Wayne Mann used to live.
I know
And
where-
that cul-de-sac.
I know, where
Up that road,
right across the street
off
from
to
my
your right,
fancy.
basically,
Yeah,
that area.
that's St. George.
That's the St. George pit.
St. George, I lived with St. George most of my life. It was part of my yard. And I got a nice picture. Yeah.
Relax.
See, I lived above Wayne, where Wayne lived.
That was pipeline.
And what you're
But,
saying
yeah,
is that the report on that will be contained in OU3?
Basically, we're saying there will be a summary, and we intend to try to close that out because we had looked into the area. We need to just sort of close that out and address it.
Report on it.
Yeah.
That whole investigation area that was done there at St. George's Pit was paid for by the borough's insurance carriers.
So let's continue moving on.
All right, so moving through the comments that are in the fact sheet. The remedial design report says that it's unlikely that the excavated materials from the Peter's Mine Pit area would be hazardous based on typical testing that you would do of materials before you could take them to a normal landfill, which is corrosivity, ignitability, reactivity, and toxicity. And the toxicity test that's done is called the, I'll read it now. Toxicity characterization leaching procedure. So it's a specific test that's done to see if toxic materials would leach from the material. And the only chemicals of concern that have TCLP, or the toxic characteristic leaching procedure, limits are arsenic and lead. It's typically a test that's used for metals. You might want to just talk to EPA about whether material with any of the constituents of concern, benzene, chloroethane, 1,4-dioxane, arsenic or lead, that are in the soils above their New Jersey residential direct contact soil remediation standard, or above concentrations that would put them above the groundwater quality standard. Whether those materials would be reused on site or whether they could be taken off site.
Did you do those tests?
Do
The test that she was talking about?
toxicity, well, TCLP has been run on materials that have been taken off site in the past, and the intent is to run TCLP again, but I think what she's trying to indicate is whether or not we should be also sampling materials to see whether they exceed the state soil cleanup standards before putting them back into
Right,
the
oh, yeah. Well, there's always been that conflict of where the arsenic is coming from.
Yes.
Is it
Yeah,
mine
it seems like we
tailings, or
got
is it
more
the
than one
sludge?
source here, yeah.
And I think the sludge went out, basically.
No, basically what we found both were essentially potential sources here in terms of arsenic. The tailings do have elevated levels of arsenic based upon the concentration of the material. It got became concentrated as part of the whole mining process. They took out the iron, whatever naturally occurring iron, you left material, less material, it became higher.
But there's so much arsenic.
There are levels somewhat above state standards in the mine tailings, and we also found elevated levels in some of the paint sludge samples.
I don't know, I mean, it's like beating a dead horse in a way, but I know that the geologist, Volkert had said that, Rich Volkert, geologist for New Jersey, said that the test that they did, that the arsenic is binded to the ore, so it really doesn't leach, whereas in the sludge, all the elements, the arsenic leaches out. So,
here the issue is that the tailings are actually part of what you call soil. They're mixed into the soil.
I understand.
So you're sampling your soil, you can be sampling soil mixed with some of these particles in tailings.
And just to recap here, and let's make sure that my understanding is accurate, that these are a list of comments when the SCIO team looked through it, said, these are questions that we would be asking. They're provided for the CAG and the public's consideration, whether they want to proceed with asking these questions and getting
Correct.
And here it's about the reuse of excavated soil and how that might be used if there are exceedances.
Right, so our understanding of reading the report is that quite a lot of soil that's excavated may be reused to grade and to be reused on the site. From a community perspective, maybe the community would want to know how clean that soil is that's being reused. So with consideration of the contaminants of concern, and which is a little different than the corrosivity, ignitability, reactivity test that's being planned.
And maybe what are the criteria for determining whether something is or is not used for being reused? So if it might be reused, what's the decision criteria associated with whether it be reused or not? And if it's not going to be reused, what would happen?
Right.
Yes.
That might be further information that you would want to discuss.
But if it's highly contaminated, you're not going to use it, right?
Well, I mean, right now, and you know, again, these are questions that we're going to be addressing as part of your response to some of the comments on the RI. But,
Skip over the
But
next.
previews
but
highlights it a lot.
I mean, basically, keep in mind that right now, there's already plans to try to take out some of the worst stuff if it's found. Basically, there's going to be, if you look at the, there's a provisions in the RD report, in the technical specifications, to essentially address any of the paint sludge, the drums, the drum carcasses that are encountered during the process. So that would come out. However, you know, the other materials would have to pass basically a TCLP in order to be put back in the pit. Again, remember, we're not, this area, we're leaving a lot of materials in place. So, I mean, basically, you know, you just be putting back in the same types of materials. We're not cleaning this area up to
That's the
to
problem.
meet standards. It's going to be, there's going to be stuff left and it's going to be capped. That's the remedy.
But the reason it's important is because we hear from various people that, oh, they're going to, you know, it doesn't have to be cleaned up. And, you know, oh, they're going to, the EPA says we're going to take all that contaminated soil, if you were going to clean it up, and we're going to dump it in the Peters mine as fill. So it's, you know, these are like rumors that are going around if you did excavate, let's say, or just leaving it there. Also, the fact that, you know, the EPA is not really doing the job and they're not going to be testing the soil to find out whether it's highly contaminated. So I know you're going to, you know.
The soil's already been tested. I mean, we've already done
and it is highly contaminated.
We've done sampling in the, so we kind of know what's in there. We know there's probably some chunks of paint sludge. There's provisions to remove the paint sludge, that waste off-site, because we know it could, you know, obviously fail TCLP.
Yeah.
It could be a leaching concern. So if that material is encountered, it would be removed before the material would be put back in the pit. But again, keep in mind, you know,
A lot of
that
it's
the remedy here is to leave materials
Leave it
there
there.
and put a cap on it.
Exactly.
That is what the remedy is.
But let's say you were excavating. Would you be taking those mine tailings if they were, quote unquote, contaminated and putting them in as fill in the Peters mine?
Let's put it this way, if we were excavating all the material,
Yeah.
we would go through the same process. We would run TCLP on the materials, you know, test for the characteristic, toxicity characteristic leaching procedures. And those other, the other characteristics, corrosivity, ignitability, reactivity. If they pass that test, they would go to a non-hazardous landfill.
Okay.
If they fail that test, they would go to a hazardous landfill.
Right.
So that's
But
the way it
not-
would be handled.
They wouldn't be put in the Peters mine.
No.
Okay.
But again, the remedy here is
I know,
it's aimed.
leaving it
It's
all
aimed
contaminated
waste
in there.
material.
So I know, I understand.
We shall agree to disagree. Terry, take
No,
it
we're
away.
agreeing.
Okay, yes, okay.
I'll move on. So the design drawings in the report showed a limited number of landfill gas wells. And they weren't located on all four sides of the three planned capped areas. And the report didn't indicate what gases would be monitored for, how often it would occur, what would be the performance standards. So that's something you might want more information about, is how will landfill gas be monitored, what will it be monitored for, you know, what are they, if there's going to be monitoring, then is there an action level, and what would cause an action, you know, what levels of what you're monitoring would cause an action. So you might want more details about that information. And then along with that, the report says that the landfill gas will be vetted just through the permeable clean fill and the final cover of soils. So they're expecting, like, if there's landfill gas, it'll percolate, its, you know, as gas rises, it'll percolate its way up into the general air and dissipate, and it won't cause a problem, which is generally true. You may want to ask EPA if there will be a soil vapor intrusion protection will be required for the recycling buildings, because I don't know if you, I assume people are somewhat familiar with radon buildup in homes. It's the same sort of thing. If there's gases coming up, if it gets captured inside of buildings that could build up to unhealthy levels. So that might be something to ask about for a building that's going to be over a cover.
Will that be in the health and safety report?
These issues, I go back and look at the RD report, but keep in mind, the buildings are going over a paved area. So, and there's going to be permeable areas put in place. The intent is to have permeable areas in place where the gases could bend. So, but so it's something we'll look at.
Yeah, because gases can go through concrete.
Yeah. Yeah, like
My
the
house
concrete.
has a radon system, so I'm sensitized to soil gases. You'll have to bear with me. The interim groundwater monitoring plan, and I showed you that table where the wells that were recommended for that monitoring were listed. We went through and looked at it and looked at areas where adding some more existing well monitoring might make that interim groundwater monitoring more robust, and that possibly a need for one new deeper groundwater well down gradient of the OCDA could also provide some useful information. That's something you might want to ask EPA to consider looking at as whether those suggestions are something that they might want to consider. And those, the specifics of those suggestions, I won't go through each one of them here because you really need to look on maps to see whether those suggestions make any sense, but they're all listed in the fact sheet that TASC produced. We noted that there's information about restoration of the wetlands and the types of plants, and it looked like a good plan. We weren't sure if there was going to be long-term monitoring of the wetlands to make sure that they stayed healthy, like if there's going to be any monitoring of plant diversity or water quality as part of the final institutional controls. So that might be something to talk about. And then as we were going through the remedial design, we didn't see any specifications of how EPA would be providing oversight if they're going to be on site every day or any kind of inspection. So I thought that might be something the community would want to have more information about. Also, we didn't see any information about how noise levels will be measured or what would prompt action. What routes will the trucks, when they're hauling materials to and from the site? We didn't see truck routes. And then we've already talked about the last bullet of if we have a concern, how do we know who to call? So that's been discussed already. That?
I have a question, a follow-up question. Can you put that slide back on? Thank you. So how many trucks do you anticipate on any one day? And can you anticipate them passing through the community?
Yes, I mean, there will be a traffic plan that would be developed by the owner contractor as part of, again, this remedial action work plan. But yeah, obviously there's going to be truck routes laid out. Trucks are going to be coming to the community at certain times.
Will you be monitoring for particulate matter on the truck routes?
What we would be doing, no, we would have basically decon procedures in place in each of the areas to make sure the trucks aren't tracking any materials out of those areas.
Okay, but I'm talking about when you have areas like in fracking areas or surface coal mining areas or whatever, and you have trucks going through, like 15, 20 trucks, a day, let's say, going through, you're generating lots of particulate matter, and these communities, I don't know where the
You mean from
truck
the diesel,
is.
you're basically concerned about the diesel
Exactly,
fumes?
and that's, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I would have to
think
look
that
into
should be
that, but
considered.
I
Especially with
don't,
the levels of asthma that are already in this room.
well, we would, I'll look into that, but I don't know if generally monitor.
Well, that's something that should be considered, especially if it's a truck route, especially if there are a number of trucks. I don't think trucks pass through normally, there's no construction or anything like that. So if you're really going to have 15, 10, 20 trucks going, then it would be a good, in my opinion, a good idea to monitor the particulate air pollution in that area and around the homes. These people who live around there do have a higher incidence of many health outcomes, including cardiovascular disease. I think that's something you should. Thank you.
And this is a question of clarification. When you started the presentation, you said this was not the complete list. It looks like the complete list of comments is in this fact sheet.
Yes,
is that
it's
correct?
in the fact sheet, yes.
If people have questions afterwards, what's the best way to get them? Or would they just go, if there are questions of clarification, should they go to you? How should they do that?
Yeah, the CAG has been contacting me by email with questions, and if that works for you and that works for us, and that way everybody reads the same thing.
Very good.
If there's anybody out there in Facebook land that has questions, post it on the Facebook page, and then we'll forward it to Skip.
No, what is it? I didn't see Facebook page.
Well, on the CAG has a Facebook page. Right now, we're live streaming the meeting.
Okay, I just want to know about the
And that will still be available. So the page is always there. It lists our events, so we announce every time there's a meeting, so people know there's a meeting.
I don't have it.
Right now.
Joe,
You're on Facebook.
Yes, I am, but I haven't seen it.
So for toxicity.
hold on just 1 second. We need one.
Sorry, just really briefly. For the toxicity characterization testing, that type of testing is capable of looking at other metals as well as organic. What did you mean that that's what EPA, only arsenic and lead is what has been selected to be looked at, or because it is capable of expanding what it characterizes?
Well, that test is looking at basically whether the contaminants in solids, so metals, can leach from the solids into water.
Right.
And so it's more appropriate, I think, for metals. And I'm not real familiar with that test. Joe, does it actually work on organics? Because I didn't think it did.
I believe there were some organics that were also part of the test,
According
but,
to the website, it
yeah.
absolutely does.
I mean, whether or not, I don't think 1,4-dioxane is one of them, but I think,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
I
what I was
can,
thinking.
take a look at
But
that.
it's just clarification, because you said only lead and arsenic would be looked, is that what the choice is?
That actually was from the report that said only lead and arsenic have limits, TCLP limits, so that's a, and I can,
But they're the only two contaminants found.
The two contaminants found on site where there are limits. There are
Okay,
other
okay.
contaminants that
right,
are analyzed for under, that can be analyzed for under
Thank you.
PCL.
yeah, that's correct.
So you say it's a leaching test, so would it actually, you raised the, Baker raised the issue that the arsenic in the paint waste was more leachable than the arsenic in the tailings. So with that, does it actually test for leaching? So that waste would,
It would test for leaching, yes.
so it would actually be more sensitive to the paint waste if there was paint waste in there? I'm trying to understand.
It really is a test for whatever material you're testing, so,
But based on its leachability.
Will contaminants leach out of it?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the material is processed, they try to extract material and contaminants from it through it with an acid. It's basically meant to give you an idea as to whether or not if you put material or waste into a landfill, would you expect that it would leach to the groundwater at levels of concern? So, I mean, that's really what the intent of the test is.
Going back to the arsenic problem, didn't Ford do a lot of tests on that whole pile of waste that was there for a couple of years before they had to move it on the arsenic? Just sort of,
There was a
confirm that
study.
it was coming from the tailings?
There was a study conducted to try to determine where the arsenic was coming from. We found parts of that study when we reviewed the report problematic, and therefore we couldn't really make a conclusion. And essentially what we required of Ford was that where the arsenic essentially is co-located with any of the paint sludge, that they needed to address it because it could be related to the paint sludge, not just the mine tailings.
So that was the decision.
That was pretty much the decision we made at that point.
Thank you.
Looking at the agenda, it seems that we have been blending a couple of agenda items, that the questions and comments from the CAG and the public regarding remedial design, some of these were raised during the presentation. Let's make sure that there are any other questions or comments regarding remedial design OU2 that weren't raised. If Joe, is that the right way to address this now? Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I guess that's what I said, focusing on the argument for it.
So I had a question going back to the St. George survey, and maybe you mentioned that that was actually carried out by the insurance company or the town, so there would be a conflict of interest there potentially? I mean, does that, I'm just trying to figure out if that means that it could possibly need.
No, I think the EPA directed that be investigated.
We looked at the work, we looked at the work plans, approved the work plans, we actually oversaw the work. I was out there a few days, we had Army Corps reps out there a few days, and even I believe Rich Chapin was out there overseeing some of that work,
So there's a conflict.
I wouldn't be calling, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was just what I
It's one of the responsibilities of potentially responsible parties to pay for the funding for cleanup and with oversight from others.
Okay, and because that was predominantly a municipal landfill, that went back to them as opposed to Ford, is that it?
But they thought there might be sludge there, because they had found some, that was visible. But when they investigated, they didn't find any more.
Any other questions regarding OU2 that people have at the moment? So Joe, I also saw that the EPA response to the task comments contained in the groundwater remedial investigation. Is that the next piece? Is that a typo?
Yes.
That was what we had already.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there were specific comments that they were provided by TASC the last time, and we had a staff meeting, and
Okay.
those comments were provided to EPA to address, and that was my intention to try to provide some of my thoughts regarding some of those comments.
And are you prepared to?
I am prepared to do that.
All right, so with that, we're wrapping up OU2 and transitioning into OU3, which is the groundwater piece. And a little bit delayed because of weather, our responses to the task comments on OU3.
Come up to the podium.
Yes, please.
So, I mean, I guess the last time around, there were comments provided by TASC on the addendum to the RI report, and I was asked to provide some of the EPA's thoughts on some of those comments. So I was intending to go through each of those comments and kind of give you my thoughts. Unfortunately, one of the problems we have is that our geologist was basically on loan to the State Department for a couple of months, and she hasn't completed her review of the groundwater RI report, so there might be a couple of comments where I still need to get her input.
You're giving us the preliminary and best thinking. And so far, and it may be
There's a
refined.
couple where, especially the things related to the adequacy of the groundwater investigation, where I still need to get some input from our geologist on. I guess the first comment that was asked was regarding the O'Connor disposal area permeable cover. The question was, or the recommendation was, if the public is concerned about future leaching of these constituents, metals in the soil, the CAG could ask EPA to conduct leachability testing. With regards to that, I just wanted to point out that Even in the task in SKIO's comments, they note that there was no evidence of massive contaminated material leaching into groundwater found during the soil or groundwater investigations. So, leachability tests are generally done in order to try to determine whether or not material may leach to groundwater. Here we have decades of groundwater data which appears to indicate that we're not getting really significant levels of leaching into the groundwater, and therefore, we really don't see the usefulness in doing additional leachability tests of the materials in place in these areas.
In O'Connor.
In the O'Connor area and in some of the other areas, if we have specific paint sludge that's, again, if we have materials that are going to go off-site, the TCLP test has to be done in order to determine how it should be disposed of. But we don't see the need to do leachability testing, additional testing of the existing soils there, again, because we're not seeing a lot of leaching. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're selecting permeable taps here, is because we're not seeing that leaching to groundwater. Even in the Peters Mine Pit area, the highest levels of 1,4-dioxane we aren't seeing it related to the materials of the pit. We're seeing it in the air shaft. So that's just our thinking with regards to the need for any additional leachability testing.
Joe, how do you separate the two? How do you separate what's in the groundwater, and they're on very high levels? Yeah.
There are elevated levels related to
1,4-dioxane and
yes,
the lead and the
arsenic,
arsenic, which has not really changed in the 50 years that it's been, there. So how do you know whether it's coming? Well, we know it's at very high levels in the shaft.
Yeah.
So how do you separate the shaft from the O'Connor and everything that's in the groundwater?
Well, because you basically groundwater flows in a certain direction. It flows in a certain pattern, and we look. Yeah, I mean, we have that detailed in the groundwater RI report, which details the direction of groundwater flow. So we kind of know the direction groundwater is flowing, and we can, evaluate whether something looks like it's coming off the Peters Mine area, or if it's coming off the O'Connor disposal area, or the Canamine Pit area. And the only area where we're really seeing levels that we're really concerned about is really the Peters Mine Pit area, and it looks like, again, the highest levels by far in that air shaft, and immediately downgrading to that air shaft.
But is it really true to say you know where the groundwater is flowing? I just can't.
Based upon the
Believe
groundwater monitoring out there, we know the general direction of groundwater flow.
In this fractured bedrock, you would actually say that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there are ways that we determine the general direction of groundwater flow. We look at the levels of groundwater in the various wells, and we can essentially tell which direction that groundwater is generally flowing.
But doesn't that direction sometimes change? Because
well, we haven't seen. I mean, we've been monitoring for 30 years. I mean, we're not seeing any sort of major change in the direction of groundwater. What Link is indicating is that there could be fractures, so as it's flowing, it might go like this, or because it might follow fractions like that. The general direction is going to be in the the direction that we're determining based upon the groundwater monitoring.
Yeah, because that was definitely what we got. What we got from Dr. Gates was that every time some event happens and there's fractures, the paths might change. So what's the path today might not be the path tomorrow.
I mean, you're missing things, is what's going on. I mean, you're not seeing everything up here. You just can't.
Well,
impossible.
we can
You're seeing
determine,
what you
again,
see,
as I indicated, we
but-
can determine the general direction of groundwater flow based upon the monitoring network that we have on site.
Would it be fair to maybe compare it to, you have prevailing wind patterns. It's the general tendency of what happens, and there could be variation.
Well, I mean, again, there could be, again, when you get into bedrock, it's flowing through cracks in the rock. Now, the cracks are going to tend to go in one direction, We're gonna be able to see that with the groundwater monitoring, but may it go over this way, following a fracture a little bit this way, go back this way. Those are the little details that you might not see
Yeah, but
based
in
upon.
fractured bedrock up here, it doesn't only go this way, it goes this way too. So that's the problem. That's the issue up here. It's that it's so complicated. And yeah, you've got a lot of monitoring wells there, but I don't think you could capture exactly where the groundwater is flowing in. I think it's not, it's really, doesn't make sense for Ford to be able to say that they know specifically where the groundwater is going. It's just impossible.
Is that modeling available?
And the modeling.
Well, not the modeling, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, basically the groundwater data, the groundwater elevation data from the wells, all that is wrapped into the RRI report. All that information is available, and generally, you know, if groundwater flows as you would expect. It goes from, it flows based upon the water, the levels that we're seeing in the wells.
Not up here.
But then Dr. Gates had said, because we're at the epicenter of earthquake activity in this area, that every time there's earthquake activity, new paths open up. So if you kind of have a path going 45 degrees, that path may all of a sudden have another option. Did we misunderstand him? I didn't think so.
I mean, he was talking generally that there could be small fractures that open up, and you can basically have it going a little bit more this way or a little bit more that way.
Right, so now you thought it was going this way, but now it's no longer going this way.
Groundwater, based upon the monitoring that we've done, flows in a certain direction. It flows, based upon the levels that we're seeing in these wells, and we've determined that it goes in this direction, and that's where we put our monitoring.
Joe, take us back one step, because we're getting into level of details. Was this question addressing the leaching? Take us back to the point on this.
Yeah, I don't know if that, it doesn't really, I don't think.
No,
it
but
really
what
feels
were
like
you
leaching.
responding to when we started down this discussion? So
It was the leaching comment.
The
That was
leaching, okay.
yes, the only comment I got to.
Oh, I think, yes. I think I was trying to point out the fact that how do you separate where the contamination is coming from shaft, the mine, O'Connor, Kevin, how do you?
Again, we have monitoring wells
placed. Because you're saying that you know where the groundwater is going.
We can tell
Definitively.
generally where the groundwater is flowing, and I'm using the word generally because you're right, there could be fracture where it goes a little bit more this way, a little more that way, but we can tell generally where the groundwater is flowing based upon the monitoring work that we've done up here.
I think the EPA and Ford and the borough are the only agencies that I've read that know where the groundwater in the highlands is going.
I'm going to call a timeout here,
Okay.
because, and I'm going to step aside, because I've actually done quite a bit of work with groundwater modeling, and both are right here, that the modeling can generally tell you, downflow gradients, where it's going, and also it's not exact, and it's general. So I think that both are true here, and I would hope that we could move on to the next question, because both are true, so. And now I'll go back to my facilitator role.
I guess the next question that was asked was that the CAG could consider asking EPA if any soil debris encountered during construction could be dug up and disposed of off-site to help alleviate some community concerns. Now, what I wanted to point out is that the remedial design report and the technical specifications already provides for a plan to be developed to address paint sludge, drums, and drum remnants. So we already have that plan in place to take out and address, take out and dispose of off-site some of these, some of the worst materials that might be encountered. In addition, of course, any material before it goes back into the Peters mine pit area that's taken out from the collar has to be tested by TCLP, and if it fails, it has to go off-site also. So we have provisions to take out some of the materials. The next comment was about the CAG. Should ask EPA whether further evaluation of 1,4-dioxane via vapor intrusion pathway is warranted. And I guess we basically did look at those levels, and we discussed that during the last meeting. And EPA's vapor intrusion screening level for 1,4-dioxane in groundwater is 2,900 parts per billion, which is, and the highest level we have here is at the bottom of the Peters Mine air shaft, which is 146 parts per billion. So the answer is, the levels we have here are not of concern for vapor intrusion path concerns. The next one was regarding benzene in groundwater. There was apparently a misrepresentation in the RI report about, I guess, benzene only being detected in the Peters Mine pit area when there was in fact one well in the Catamine pit area where benzene was detected at low levels. And the RI report can be corrected to address that, to make note of that. The next one was regarding groundwater flow paths. It says, staff suggests that the CAG should ask EPA for further clarification of groundwater flow paths in the deep bedrock in consideration of observed downward vertical gradients at the RW3 and other wells on site. Now, again, our geologist is looking at that. They have the task comment and get some feedback from her. So I don't have that at this point. I just wanted to point out that we did ask Cornerstone what their thoughts were on this issue. And basically, I guess what they're indicating is that what they believe happens is that, groundwater in the higher elevations, it basically recharges, it moves down and towards the valley there, so it's sort of down the hillside into the valley area. As it moves into that area, it then starts coming back up. What they point out is that if you look at the well cluster, which is down gradient of the RW3 cluster, which task had referred to, it's in the what would be the SR7 area, the fifth well, the RW15 cluster, which is paired with an overburdened well, OW33.
During, say where it is.
It's basically right off of Hope Mountain Road.
Okay.
You know where the SR3 area is? That's a great corner there. The big excavation was done, was restored. Mm-hmm. Right behind that, there was another large area that was excavated. The wells are in that area, so they're further down gradient than the air shaft and the RW3, which is like right on Hope Mountain Road. Uh-huh. Looking at that cluster, what they saw was that have the levels here, that the direction of water flow in the bedrock in 2016 was down gradient going down, and in 2017 it was going up. And that's, their point is that at that point they're sort of in this transition area between the down gradient flow and then it coming back up as it goes into the valley and the discharge area where you would expect water to discharge in the valley, the low-lying valley area where the surface water bodies are. So that's their explanation. It's down and then sort of upward. Now, I went and I looked at the
topography?
And so, yeah, basically because of topography, basically the water is essentially going to be draining out. It's coming up and draining as you would expect. You have mountains, they drain in the valley area. They drain where the surface, and it's usually surface water bodies at the bottom of that valley area. And that's where they drain. So the water recharges in the higher areas and then sort of discharges in the lower lying areas in the valley. And that's why you have your rivers and rivers and your ponds and the reservoir and so forth in that low lying area. Now, I did go back and actually look at the water levels in the next furthest down gradient well cluster we have, which is far off site near Sally's Pond, and the levels are clearly up gradient. The water is coming up from the bedrock at those wells in both the 2016 and 2017 sample rounds, which kind of supports what you would expect to happen and what Cornerstone is indicating they believe is happening here. Again, my geologist is going to be looking at this, and she'll let me know if she doesn't agree with what Cornerstone is indicating here.
Because topography doesn't always tell you.
No, you're right. It doesn't, but that's why we're looking.
I mean, you look at it.
We're not just looking at the topography. Yeah, no, we're not looking at the topography, just the topography here. We're also looking at the water levels that we're seeing in the well clusters.
Well, I look forward to hearing what your geology says.
Several new well clusters were put in during 2015. The CAG may want to ask EPA whether flow characteristics were identified in these new wells and what type of vertical gradients. Oh, I just discussed that the RW15 are the new ones that were put in 2015. There was another one, RW16, in the O'Connor disposal area, but that well wasn't paired with a shallower or deeper well, so we can't really tell the direction of flow in that, based upon that well. The CAG may want to ask EPA to consider further defining concentration of 1,4-dioxane in deeper groundwater and to include figures showing the extent of 1,4-dioxane contamination in groundwater. And again, EPA, our geologist, is looking at that. As far as the figures, I'll admit the report was it's a little unclear in the addendum to the RI report. There weren't figures that were included in volume 2 of that report, which were in the old reports that were stuck in that volume 2 report. Volume 1 report didn't have figures showing the concentrations of 1,4-dioxane, so we'll try to address that. We'll see if we can move those figures forward into the volume 1 of the report.
Yeah, because the concentrations of 1,4-dioxane are very high, very deep in the shaft.
Yeah, we do know they are the highest in the shaft,
and extremely.
And we see them dropping as you move away from that shaft. Yes.
That's why you need deeper wells.
Okay, the SCIO suggested that the CAG should ask EPA to consider installing sentinel wells at the site boundary to better detect 1,4-dioxane and other constituents flowing past the site boundaries. And as I think I alluded to earlier, that sentinel wells will be a part of the remedies that are evaluated in the feasibility study. If you look at the candidate technologies memo, there was discussions of sentinel wells, and they will be brought into the feasibility study. So we'll be
You're going to talk about that, right, Sam?
About classification, etc.
Yeah, and sentinel well.
The next one was about the use of the ecological screen level for comparison to surface water for 1,4-dioxane. Basically, Cornerstone referenced the 22,000 part per billion 1,4-dioxane level in surface water, which is a level which is an ecological based level. Our feeling is that it's appropriate to reference that, but that there needs to be another line added in that section of the report which also compares the levels in surface water to the New Jersey groundwater quality standard, given the fact that the water is discharging to the reservoir and it's going to be used as a potable water source. So we feel that both should be referenced in the RI report.
So the levels are lower, they're acceptably low, they're lower for the ecological. Yeah.
Basically, 1,4-dioxane is not really a big concern for ecological receptors, but it is for us apparently if we drink it. So.
Yeah. That's funny that it's in there.
The next question is that the CAG may want to ask EPA to review the appropriateness of using the BioChlor model for decision making. I guess the bottom line here is the BioChlor model, this sort of screening tool, it is sort of a generalized screening tool. We're not going to be using it for decision making here. Basically, it was just used to essentially get an idea as to how far off-site the groundwater, the 1,4-dioxane plume might go. There was concern raised by the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission whether or not it looked like it was going to reach the reservoir. This model clearly shows, the results show that that's not going to happen. That seems to be consistent with what we have in terms of our monitoring well data. Our furthest down grading well is showing levels of 0.9. Our wells down in Sally's Pond, we see nothing in the bedrock, and I think we gotten to text of like 0.1 parts per billion, well below the standard in the shallow well there. So again, At this point, geologists are going to be looking at this, but we really don't see a problem with using the biochlor model just to get that sort of indication. We can go back and use other groundwater models, spend more time, collect more data, and find, well, does the plume go 200 feet more off-site or 200 feet less? Doesn't really make a difference. I mean, the data still is the data. The data tells us that our highest levels are in the air shaft. That's where we need to focus our attention. And so, again, for those reasons, we don't really believe that use of the biochlor model is inappropriate here.
But you're going to, what this model is showing is that by the time the groundwater goes off-site, everything is gone.
What it's showing is it drops below standards.
Right.
Yeah. And that seems to be consistent with what we're looking at here. We've got 0.9 on-site. At the furthest down gradient well, you go off-site or one off-site wells. It's essentially non-detected in bedrock, and it's detected, I think, at 0.1 parts per billion.
How many
well below
wells
the
do you
standard.
have that are that far down?
How many wells do we have
that are
there?
that, far away from the shaft, let's say?
Well, I mean, there are wells spaced out away from it. There's wells near the shaft. There's
Yeah.
several more clusters out going into that, the RW15 cluster, and then we have well cluster down near Sally's Pond at this point in time.
2?
We have 3 wells. There's 3, there's 2 shallow wells. There's a rock well which is sampled at 2 depths.
And we have a question here. Is that enough?
So, the depth that you're finding the depth of the air shaft, how far, just remind me, how deep down?
230 feet.
So your groundwater modeling, and you're describing it as the groundwater going down and then resurfacing?
And that is what basically Cornerstone is, indicating what they believe is happening
So
out here.
the deeper water would go down further and surface farther away?
It would basically go down a little bit and then come back up. Yeah.
So I guess...
I mean, I guess the belief is that any of that water, especially the shallower bedrock water, is essentially discharging to surface water out.
So the question is there any possibility that that plume could go deep and then come up like further away than you're sampling, or that's kind of out of?
Well, I mean, we have wells all the way down near Sally's Pond, which is sort of at the bottom of the valley there, so we wouldn't expect that to be the case.
I don't know, Joe.
But again, our geologist is going to be taking a look at this, and she'll,
So you'll give us an update.
let me know
Yeah.
what I mean. But what I'm telling you is what Cornerstone is indicating makes sense, and it also seems to be supported by some of the data that we collected out here.
Yeah, Cornerstone works with board.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Go ahead.
I didn't hear your response to how many wells were by the Sally's Pond.
We have 4 sampling points.
All right,
at Sally's Pond.
that's what I just want to double check, because that's what I have here.
Yeah, it's 4. It's 2 overburden wells, and there's a rock well which is sampled at 2 depths.
All right, and
How deep is the bedrock well? Do you remember?
At Sally's Pond,
Yeah.
I think the deepest depths are around 200 feet. Somewhere between like 150 and 200.
We have some comments here, and also during the break, the task report will be posted as a document on the website. And is there,
And the presentation also.
and the presentation?
Fact sheet and the presentation.
And so is there a report for the RI and 03 and then RD on 02?
Yes.
Correct? Okay, so we just want to make that clear. Thank you.
Okay, the next comment, CAG may want to ask EPA if any additional focused investigations for 1,4-dioxane in soil is needed to be sure that source material is not overlooked. And I'd like to say, as Skio also noted, there's already been investigations done at the site to analyze soils for 1,4-dioxane. We did a focused investigation in the O'Connor disposal area. Didn't find anything. We analyzed the paint sludge for 1,4-dioxane. didn't detect it in the paint sludge. We sampled, as part of the pre-design investigation, we had collected a number of soil samples from soil borings in the Peters Mine Pit area. Those samples were also analyzed for 1,4-dioxane, and again, nothing was detected. So at this point, we don't see the value in doing additional sampling to try to detect 1,4-dioxane in the soil, since we've already done a number of sampling events here to try to detect 1,4-dioxane and have not found a source of 1,4-dioxane. Also pointing out that the highest levels, again, are not downgrading into the shaft. They're actually not downgrading into the pit. They're in the shaft itself where we're seeing the highest levels. So it sounds like there's something that might be put down here or left down here.
And you're taking into consideration Jacob's report.
Yes, we are taking, and that's one of the reasons why there was a modeling effort done. The BioCore model was to try to address some of the Water Commission concerns about the potential for the site to impact the reservoir. And I guess the last comment basically really isn't to us, it's to the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission. Asked them whether or not they could routinely sample for, I guess, 1,4-dioxane and other constituents. I think they're already required to sample for volatiles. I've seen their data in the past, we've looked at it, so I think they already sampled for benzene. The issue is the 1,4-dioxane. I don't think they're required to, but I know they have voluntarily sampled for it in the past. So, you can certainly ask the Water Commission if they want to continue to do that. They may already be doing that.
Do we have, and again, we're kind of blending a couple agenda items here. Any questions regarding what Joe mentioned, understanding that there's still another level of review with your geologist? So,
Yeah, I think the meeting before all the snow, we had talked about possibly, you said you would be looking into the fact that the borough only tests for benzene and arsenic every 3 years.
Yes, that's what they're sampling. You mean in the municipal well?
Yeah.
Yeah, and basically they sample for volatiles every 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were going to check out and see if that is really enough, considering what's going on at the Superfund site, and also whether or not the EPA would suggest or request or mandate that the borough test our municipal wells more frequently, or begin testing, they're not testing at all, for 1,4-dioxane.
Yeah, again, as we've indicated in the past, in order for me to basically mandate that, we would have to feel that the municipal wells were threatened by the site, or they would provide us some information that we need to do our investigation, and neither of those are the case at this point in time. And we've explained that in the past, given the distance to the wells from the site, given the levels that we're seeing, on site near the boundaries of the site, and even our wells off site. We don't think it's warranted. The wells are, 2 miles or more away from the site. They're on the other side of that valley, on the other side of the discharge, the groundwater discharge zone. The one well that's closest is actually screened above the bottom of the valley. So it's at a higher elevation than the valley where, the Sally's Pond and so forth is. So for those reasons, we don't see the wells as being threatened at this point in time.
So you did look into it as
We did look into
did
it.
an evaluation.
And then, of course, there's the added issue that the wells have already been sampled for 1,4-dioxane in the past.
Right, that's a long time ago.
That was 2016 was the last time it was sampled. And it was sampled in 2013.
And there were levels.
2013, you had one or two wells where you had a 0.1 detect, I believe.
Something. So when you're talking about the valley and, that they can't cross over, are you also taking into consideration the bedrock?
Again, our geologist did look at this, and you're well aware of that. I did provide the results of her review to you back in That was done back in 2016. The data really hasn't changed since that point in time. The levels we're seeing are consistent. The distribution is consistent. So there's really nothing to make us, change our conclusions based upon that data.
Do you think it's a worry, or as Dr. Gates did, he would worry? Do you think it's a worry for the residents that live in Ringwood that the aquifer at the Superfund site is contaminated, and that we're all on wells?
Again, given the levels that we're seeing leaving the site, the levels we're seeing near the site boundary, even off-site, they don't seem to. It doesn't seem like the site presents a threat, And especially given the distance that the municipal wells are from the site, the fact that there's, as we indicated, discharge areas and recharge areas between the site and these other wells, we don't see these wells as being threatened.
I have a question on the process. You're also due for a site update, but we have Ken Petroni here. Can we table that until after his presentation?
Yeah, I can give you the site update. The only thing we have is really of note is that the candidate technologies memo was approved by EPA, and the next step would be for the feasibility study to be prepared. And that was the task contract had indicated that they did not have concerns regarding that document during our last meeting.
Will that candidate technologies memo, is that something also that will be uploaded to the website? Is that a...
That's something we can upload to the website.
Yeah, I don't think I have done it, so yes, I will do that.
We'll follow up and make sure that the task reports from SKIO, both of them, and the candidate technologies memo both get uploaded. Thank you. All right, thanks. That was a very brief agenda.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Now we turn the page.
Yes. Ken, you're taking us on to page 2.
I hope we make it to page 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did bring some handouts, but I don't know if I have enough for everybody. I have about 15, so I'm going to just start with the CAG, and then whatever's left over, people can have. So the first item, let me just jump around first and jump down to the last item for me, which is the follow-up on the governor's invitation. The governor's office did receive the letter from the CAG inviting him and the commissioner up to the site for a tour. And then soon after that, Mark and I met and briefed the governor's office on the whole site and status of the case. So right now, we don't have a response from the governor's office as to what they're going to do next, but we did brief the governor's office, and actually it was the same week that of the scheduled last meeting we briefed them. So they are up to date on the site. They're aware of the invitation, and as you know, one of the problems is that the commissioner hasn't been confirmed yet by the legislature. So a lot of things are on hold right now until the commissioner is officially confirmed by the legislature. But they are aware of the request, and they're taking that into consideration.
Just for clarification, Commissioner of...
The Commissioner of DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. So.
And who may that be?
It's McCabe, Commissioner McCabe.
Oh,
Catherine McCabe?
Catherine?
Yeah, she's apparently really cool.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the last thing. So NRD, back to the top, natural resources, the question was to explain what the Natural Resource Damage Assessment Program is about. The Natural Resource Damage Assessment Program for Superfund sites really involves what they call a group of trustees from lots of different agencies, not just NJDEP. The commissioner of NJDEP is a trustee that is involved in any natural resource damage assessment work related to Superfund. EPA is involved, Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is involved, so there's lots of different agencies involved when it comes to evaluating natural resource damages. NJDEP does have an Office of Natural Resource Restoration Group, is what they're called. I have just like a 2-page handout on that that kind of gives you an overview of what they do and how they operate. It also has their contact information. I talked to them about this site. Generally, they don't get involved until the end of the remedial investigation, until the decision is made, at least until the remedial investigation is complete, so we know all the impacts of a site discharge. So in this case, obviously wetlands would be a concern, endangered species would be looked at, and groundwater. The state of New Jersey owns the groundwaters of the state, so we're the trustee for groundwater contamination for sure, and that would be one thing that they'd be interested in looking at. At this point in time, one of the other things that they're not really sure of is where the program's going, because the last 8 years there was no claims or made by our office out of the DEP, so they don't know the future. They believe that the future will be a more robust natural resource restoration program, but the commissioner hasn't spoken to that yet, and probably won't until she gets confirmed by the legislature. So they don't really know what they're going to be doing in the future, but they're certainly willing to evaluate natural resource damages. For the record, I think most of the wetlands work has already been done or is planned to be done. So Ford has done a lot of wetlands restoration and mitigation already in accordance with our land use management program. So they work closely with our land use management program. And somebody earlier asked a question about monitoring wetlands mitigation long term. That is part of the process that they go through when they work with our land use program. There's at least a 5-year monitoring program where our people are involved in making sure that the vegetation does come back the way it's supposed to come back and doesn't die off. So they monitor any restoration work that Ford has done in the past and will do in the future regarding wetlands. So for that natural resource, it's already underway, and mitigation or replacement is already occurring. The groundwater one is the one that's still out there, and they won't even be interested in looking at that until the RI is complete and a decision is made on the remedy. But that will be something that they can look at in the future.
And is that a directive that we should bring up when the time comes, or is that just part of the process on the state level?
Well, natural resource damage assessment is part of the Superfund process. If you wanted to get the state involved in particular as a trustee for groundwater, yeah, you can make that request to make sure that they are. Like I said, we're not really sure where the program's going in the future because there's a new administration and they haven't really gotten any direction yet from the commissioner, since she hasn't confirmed yet. But they expect a more robust natural resource program in the future, and they would be willing to certainly talk to Ford or the responsible parties about settlement agreements or anything like that, but they don't have any direction yet as far as looking at groundwater at this site. And like I said, if you go to the website at the bottom of the handout, you can get more information. They have frequently asked questions section, things like that, definitions of things that they look at. All that information is there. Okay, the other thing on the agenda for me was the wells, and I have another handout for that. I did get the information on the wells, specifically the depth, but all the other engineering characteristics of the Ringwood Borough wells are on this sheet that I'm handing out. You can see it tells you the depth of each of the wells. Locational information is a little bit less of a public information type thing. They don't like to give out location of municipal supply wells specifically.
For security reasons.
For security reasons, correct. But I think the information that you're looking for, the depth of those wells, is there. I don't think there's any other question related to that. Is You just wanted to know the depth of the Ringwood Borough wells, is that correct?
Yeah. What do you think about, you know, the fact that all of Ringwood is on groundwater and we have this highly contaminated site, groundwater site, and our wells are not being tested? I know that our technical advisor, Terry, suggested that they should be tested, especially for that. And Professor Gates basically said anything down gradient of the site should be tested. So, you know, I just feel like it's better to know.
Yeah, well, they are
Or not,
tested. I
you
mean,
know,
they have
not
to
knowing is not good.
They do have to meet regulatory requirements for testing.
Yeah.
So they do, you know, go through the DEP as far as meeting their regulatory requirements for testing. And as Joe mentioned, we're pretty confident that there's no threat to those municipal wells at this point in time. Certainly, in a minute I'll talk about the CEA and biennial certifications and things like that. But certainly, as we mentioned before, this groundwater is going to be monitored forever. As long as the material is being left on site under a cap, it never goes away. So the groundwater will be monitored, the cap will be monitored forever. So it's not like we're walking away and the threat can come down the road. And the way it looks right now, we're pretty confident that there's no threat to the municipal wells or the Wanacue Reservoir. We'll certainly keep looking at that. Our geologists have been looking at it. EPA's geologists have been looking at it. So we're watching it closely, but we don't really see the threat there like we might see at other sites. So we're pretty confident with that, and the CEA and the biennial certification will help to take care of that too. So yeah.
Real quick, just Mr. Spear and Mr. Hack, if you could. Could you just explain the purchasing of the water from the Passaic Valley Water Commission, just for general reference? I didn't know that we got water from them, and just how much we get and where it's distributed to.
It's distributed to the whole system, and it used to be we bought a lot. I would say 25% of our water used to come from the reservoir. Over the last couple of years, we developed our wells. We've tightened up our water system. Now, during times of high use in the summer, like if our wells can't keep up with demand, and during high use only, what happens is a valve opens and the reservoir water blends with our water and fills our tanks.
So does it come from North Jersey District Water?
It actually comes from the reservoir, yes.
Oh, okay, not Passaic Valley Water.
Through Passaic Valley has an allocation with the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission. We have an allocation with Passaic Valley. The water is the water that you look at.
The water, yeah, the water is
how I
the
drive.
water. It's just who it's coming from.
It's just,
okay.
yeah, how it's legally.
Oh, okay, I understand. That was just for general reference. Thanks. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So when you look at the water quality data, the reports from the municipal wells, it's clear that you're following rules and regulations in terms of what you're measuring, but they're really limited in the metals, let's say, which is my area. I think there are a total of 10 metals that are looked at, I mean 8 to 10 metals. And so I wondered, given some of the other metals that are potentially, if there's a viable exposure route to units in the case of the municipal wells and all, if there are things like boron and antimony, things that are not being tested, and things that are found on the geology here and the contamination, it concerns me a bit that those other potential contaminants are not being evaluated. Now, this is not a Ringwood issue. This is Ridgewood. This is, you have a set of standards, metals that are evaluated, and you're following that. That's true. But under certain circumstances, like circumstances here, I'm concerned about, as I said, metals like antimony, boron, things that might have a potential health implication.
I appreciate that, and there's always concerns for that. I mean, we can talk for hours about that. There's lots of unregulated compounds that we're concerned about. 1,4-dioxin wasn't a compound of concern 10 years ago, and now it is. And PFOA and PFNA and PFC compounds weren't known about until more recently, and now we're starting to look at those too. So all I can say is, when we become aware of something that we should be looking at, we start looking at it. But there's thousands of chemicals out there that we're not looking at. So.
I'm just concerned particularly for Superfund site areas.
I understand, but it applies everywhere, though. It applies to Superfund sites as well as non-Superfund sites, where we have industrial complexes. So yeah, we're concerned about that too, because there's only so much we can do per the regulations and per the analytical capabilities that we have in the laboratories as well. So
I was reading, sorry to cut you off, Ken, I was reading that when the Toxic Substance Controls Act was passed in 1976, TSCA, or however you pronounce it, when it was passed, almost, either a little less or a little more, 50,000 chemicals were grandfathered into the law considered to be safe without going through the evaluation because EPA didn't have the resources. And I think that is kind of what gives way to something like 1,4-dioxane not really being recognized for what it could potentially do to someone way down the line.
Those evolve, and exactly what you're saying. But the point is that when you're on industrial complexes or Superfund areas or areas where the geology here in and of itself could be rich in uranium, because there's uranium sites around here, and other contaminants that maybe just doing the standards are missing something. And I'm particularly concerned in areas that are industrialized or Superfund impacted.
I appreciate that. It's just, hopefully our water supply people look at that and consider that all the time, and that's something, when they have the authority to regulate things, we certainly will. There's only so much we can do. So if there's no further questions about those things, I can move into the CEA stuff. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, so this first handout is just a generic one I highlighted. We talked, somebody mentioned earlier about permanent equivalence versus permits. So for non-Superfund sites in the state of New Jersey, we have what we call remedial action permits. Once a remedy is selected and they start to implement the cleanup, they have to get a remedial action permit, whether it's for groundwater or soil. In this case, since it's a Superfund site, the responsible parties don't have to get a remedial action permit, but they still do have to comply with the substantive provisions of our rules, our permit rules. So they will have to establish a CEA or classification exception area, and they will have to do biennial certification, and that's what the highlighted section talks to about Superfund sites, or surplus site is a Superfund site. So I just wanted to give you that little highlight as to where they have to go with CEAs. So CEA, or classification exception area, somebody also mentioned this earlier too, is an institutional control as opposed to an engineering control. It's really just a notification process. It's just out there to tell people that this area of the state of New Jersey is not meeting certain groundwater criteria right now. And so it's classified. All over the state of New Jersey, the groundwaters get classified as drinking water, groundwater, or non-drinking water, groundwater. So this happens to be an area where it is a drinking water supply groundwater. It's a Class 2A aquifer, is what they call it. Whenever there's contamination above our standards, then we have to, the responsible party is required to establish a classification exception area, because it's an exception area because it's not meeting the Class 2A aquifer standards, the clean standards for groundwater. So that's why we call it a classification exception area, or a CEA. And what I have here as another handout is the form that has to be filled out, and it provides, it's like a 6-page form that provides all the detailed information about how one goes about establishing a CEA. So you can kind of look through that. But you'll see on there it provides all the block and lot locations for the extent of this classification exception area. It talks about the types of contaminants that are not meeting the Class 2A aquifer standards. It talks about the duration of this CEA, of this exception area, and how it will be monitored over the long term or over the duration of that. That classification exception area stays in place for as long as the contamination exceeds Class 2A aquifer standards. So it will never be lifted unless the aquifer meets drinking water standards or groundwater quality standards for a Class 2A aquifer. So that essentially means it will be there for a very long, long time. There are also, there is a longer guidance document. I didn't make copies of it because it's about 40 pages long. I'll leave one copy with the CAG, and I highlighted some sections in there, but you can look at the full guidance for classification exception areas. All this information is also available on our website. The site remediation program website, I'm going to leave a copy of that website in case you ever want to go there to find out.
Why don't we
copies.
read it for people, if anybody's watching? What is the, go ahead.
www.nj.gov/DEP/S state R Robert P. Peter. SRP.
SRP, yeah. Site remediation program. And that
As a
website.
clarification, this CEA, this gets back to the question somebody asked about meeting state permit requirements, and that this is kind of in lieu of...
No, that's required for all CEAs.
Okay.
That's a fact, it's a CEA fact sheet that gives all the facts about that classification exception area. How big is it? How deep is it? What are
And
the
that would be
contaminants?
triggered if the monitoring levels exceeded the threshold established by the state.
Right. Anytime the groundwater quality standards exceed, or the groundwater quality exceeds the groundwater quality standards for the state, then a CEA must be established. And it defines the horizontal and vertical extent of that classification exception area. And the
And the
contaminants.
Superfund site is one.
Yes,
So I just want to establish that.
it will get a CEA notification form filled out and established. So, and then also as part of that, as part of a normal remedial action permit in the state of New Jersey, which they don't have to get a permit, but they still have to do something that we call biennial certification. So, and they'll have to do this for both the CACs and the groundwater at this site. So what that means is that the responsible parties must certify to the state every 2 years that for soil contamination left behind, that the CAP or the protective measures for soil exposure are maintained and in good condition. And then they have to certify that the CEA hasn't expanded, so that the contamination hasn't gone beyond the limits of the defined classification exception area. So those are the two things that biennial certification reporting will require. And so every 2 years, they will have to submit a report to NJDEP certifying that the caps are in good condition, there's no breaches, they haven't eroded, whatever. And then they'll also have to certify that the extent of contamination defined by the CEA is still a good delineation, hasn't exceeded that. And that's part of where Joe mentioned sentinel wells come in. Sentinel wells are a required part of a CEA. They're the clean wells outside the boundary of the classification exception area. And they have to be monitored to make sure that it's not migrated beyond the boundaries of the CEA. And so they'll have to prove every 2 years that those sentinel wells remain clean. If they become contaminated in the future, then the CEA will have to be updated, expanded. But that's our protection against threat to off-site receptors like municipal supply wells or the Wanacue Reservoir.
You haven't really put this, you haven't figured out where these wells are going to be yet, right?
The sentinel wells? No.
This is going to be after the record of decision?
Yeah, or it may be part of, I don't know that we got there yet, if it's going to be part of the decision document. I mean, it'll be mentioned as part of the, certainly mentioned that Sentinel Wells will be, have to be part of establishing the CEA and doing the biennial certification. The actual location of where they might be, that can be determined at a later date, yeah.
So you haven't determined whether they'll be off-site yet?
They'll most likely will be off-site. It depends how you want to define the site.
Yeah.
They'll have to be in a clean zone, an area where there is no groundwater contamination right now. So there are Sentinel wells to warn us that contamination has migrated beyond what we consider the boundaries of the exception area.
How deep will those wells be?
As deep as they need to be. So the CEA defines the vertical and horizontal extent of contamination. So wherever that extent is, whether it's 200 feet deep or 300 feet deep, that's how deep the Sentinel well will have to be to make sure that it hasn't migrated beyond that area.
How many of those would there be?
And that'll be a judgment call based on hydrogeologist evaluation, what we think is necessary. So I think that sums it up. That's basically what the requirements are for a classification exception area biennial certification. Again, it's an institutional control. Also, everything within a CEA, all the property owners get notified that they're within the CEA. So any block and lot property that is within the the horizontal extent of a classification exception area will get a formal notification, or is required to get formally notified that your property is sitting within a classification exception area. The purpose of this is to also prevent wells from going into those contaminated areas, new wells, supply wells. Yes.
Will all the Sentinel wells have to be placed either in borough property or state property?
Don't have to be, no. They can be placed anywhere where access is granted.
So they might be put on private property?
Yeah, they could be, yes. We have in the past on other non-Superfund sites. It'll be wherever it makes sense to put them, and then they'll have to pursue getting property owners access.
And if the property owners don't grant that access, is that an eminent domain issue?
Is that what?
An eminent domain issue?
We try not to do that now, I don't think so. We'll find an alternative usually, and we don't like to go to court to force somebody to do that.
I got a big backyard, you're welcome to come to my
So did I cover everything that you had questions about, or?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will turn to Vivian and Gretchen on the update of NYU Health Study.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, because I don't know too much right now, you know.
Basically, I'm new to the CAG, and so I heard about the NYU team and all the stuff that they had done here. So part of what I've done is to introduce myself to Dr. All of a sudden, I'm black.
It's okay. Dr. Judy, as my students call me.
Speak up, that's easier. Oh, okay. So that was the first thing I did, is to talk with them and find out what they have done. And it seems to me they've done a wonderful job in terms of involving the community, in terms of the situation that we face here, and what community members can do about it. There's a citizens, what was it called?
Citizens Advisory Board.
Yeah, Citizens Advisory Board, and also citizens were involved in doing citizen science, and people from the community were involved in terms of doing testing, I believe, some in yards and some groundwater stuff, and drinking water testing.
And surface water.
And surface water.
And
Good.
ponds.
And what was the last thing?
In ponds.
Oh, in ponds, yes.
Fishing ponds.
Yes. But anyway, that was a wonderful effort in terms of the community and assisting the community and being aware of what is going on here in the area where people live. So much of what they have done needs to be followed up on. And, you know, everything we've talked about tonight is information that affects the health of the community, the broader community and the community that lives where all this is taking place. And so it's vital really to all of us. So I'm just going to kind of be following what goes on. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us about the things that you do?
Well,
Yes, yeah, please. Please.
So, yeah, just really briefly, because I'm mindful of the time. So in 2013, we were asked by the Ramapo Native Americans to work with them and to try to figure out what are some of the health implications, more information about the contamination, and because no matter what's being done at EPA or other places, you know, these are the people who live there. And so they want to know what's going on in their lives. So we started out with surveys to find out we have 178 surveys about health aspects, about demographics, about who was exposed, and then we had a lot of focus groups, meeting with the communities, and what do you want? What do you need us to help you with or guide you with? And basically, they wanted to know more about their air, they wanted to know more about their water, they fish, they are a sovereign nation. They wanted to know if they're fishing in ponds that, you know, may have contamination, if their homes, because of infrastructure in their homes or whatever, you know, are contaminated. And so what we did, based upon their request of us, is exactly what Gretchen told you, is we had meetings and we had people who lived in the Upper Ringwood area, people like Doug who don't live in the Upper Ringwood area, so we had controls, we had people who live in the area, and they took us out to where they wanted us to test, and they collected water, we collected water with them, so it was done well. They read their measurements on a very simple kit, but they were involved. This is theirs, this is not ours. And we took some samples back, and we did some advanced electronics at NYU Medical School and figured out some things. We also have followed up with, so we did ponds where they fish, we did inside homes. We are setting out to do air monitoring with personal, what we call air beam monitors in designated areas that the community has asked for. And we did blood sampling to see if there was an exposure route and what the body burden of blood is. And I know you're all waiting for me to tell you what these results are, but number one, I'm not going to be telling you because they're still being evaluated. Number two, this data belongs to the Ramapo Nation, and they will be the first ones to hear about the outcomes. Whatever they decide to do with it, whatever we as a partnership decide to do with it, is what will be done with it. So please stay tuned. We're working with geologists, we're working with Alec Gates, we're working with metal chemists, we're working with a number of people. We're toxicologists, and we will have that data as hopefully in the very, very near future. But as I said, there'll be a town hall meeting. First, there'll be letters going out to the individuals who worked with us, like Vivian, and so they'll be the first ones to know about what their homes might be. The ponds will be discussed in a town hall meeting that will be publicly announced and hopefully put on your CAG Facebook page and Ramapo page. So if you want to know more about what NYU is doing, the Ramapo NYU Health Alliance Facebook page, we keep it updated with what we're doing and what we're doing with
The 178 surveys, that's a mix of people from within the
Yes.
community and without.
Yes, and we've now collected 28 surveys. The Ramapo Nation consists of 3 clans, and so we're now moving into the second clan, who live in Hillburn, New York. The Turtle Clan in Ringwood here were the first people that we worked with.
Would you repeat the name of that Facebook page?
It's the NYU, it's the Ramapo /NYU Health Alliance Facebook page.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you have any other questions other than what are the outcomes, I'll be happy to talk to you.
Thank you. And thank you for your questions tonight. Go ahead.
Ken, this is,
We're going to focus on missed opportunity for questions.
yeah, I just want to ask Ken, which I forgot. Do you know anything about the 1,4-dioxane at the Borough Shooting Range?
I know that in the Water Supply Commission's report, they sampled there once and had one hit, but they were not able to reproduce that.
Okay. Okay. So that's where it is now.
They had one hit, I forget the concentration.
One hit in
It's in their
a
report.
well or in the ground?
In
or
the
in the
soil,
soil?
if I'm remembering
No,
correctly.
my recollection was they did have, they had some shallow monitoring wells there, they might have some lead issues there, but they, as far as the 1,4-dioxane, they did detect it at a level about 0.1 parts per billion. They went back, resampled, was not detected. Yeah.
And they don't have any idea where it would be coming from?
No.
Okay.
We've already discussed all the
Yeah.
uses of 1,4-dioxane.
Thanks.
Have sucker, you're going to bring us home.
No, actually, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I wish we had more time. All right, quickly, I'm not going to, what I'm going to do is defer to Judy Talbot and to talk a little bit. We brought her out here tonight, because she had been here a year ago, spoke to a lot of the people here, and we wanted her to come back and kind of do a check-in after that year to see how things were going. But she also, as we see, is a very good facilitator and has a lot of good ideas about ways to help the CAG move forward, whether you need a full-time facilitator, whether a part-time, whether revolving. So
No, it's all right.
We have time.
It's 15 minutes. So, Pat, if you could quickly talk about the site by Pete Lopez?
Yeah, Pete Lopez is our new regional administrator, and Joe and I and a couple other people have already briefed him on the site, so he's aware of what's going on here. So if you want to do kind of the same thing that you did for the commissioner, yes, I can give you that information, afterwards when you get that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and we're trying to get more into New Jersey, so hopefully,
Yeah,
he will be willing to come, because he's from upstate New York. So what I really, first of all, if there's any more questions from the public, I think, we should, related to any of this, we should ask that first. And if not, anyone?
I want to congratulate Ken,
Oh, he just walked out.
because that's the most I've ever heard him say.
I think he was overwhelmed.
You want a new shirt, just.
You're the hero of the night. You just called you the man of the evening, and you missed it.
Yes, that's the most I've ever seen you stand up there, and say.
And it was so good. And one of the things
You have a
that
way with words.
I would like to implement is that at the end of the meeting, to think about what the next meeting needs to address, because there's going to be a meeting on May 11th.
10th.
Oh, 10th,
May
okay, May 10th. But what do you think are some of the things that need to be addressed at that meeting?
Well, I think
Well, we have to-
covered everything.
We have to follow up on all the questions that Terry left us with
Okay.
tonight.
Yeah.
Some of those you did, but there are probably
Yeah,
other
some of them,
outstanding ones, right?
Wait a minute.
And I would like,
That's a
It's a mistake. She skipped May. Megan was getting ahead of herself.
May
May 10th.
Yeah, May 10th.
Okay, you're kind of.
And then we have 2 minutes to wrap up.
Yeah.
So who wraps?
Oh, and the wrap.
Well, in that case, see, that wasn't on there, so.
Can I just offer
Yes,
a suggestion?
Yes.
In terms of setting agenda for the next one, what we do on the member of advisory board that I'm on is we have special executive meetings. And during those executive meetings, we decide what the agenda is going to be.
Right.
And then it's all set for the next meeting. So it would probably, rather than spending the 32 seconds left here or whatever, it would be good to implement an executive meeting that doesn't last very long, maybe an hour. And you have that either before, after, or a different time, which is set the agenda.
Oh, yeah, to go into closed session.
We communicate a lot.
No, it was also, I do like to catch at the end of the meeting though, because sometimes there'll be things that people have in their mind, like, we really need to capture this, and I don't know about anyone else, but as I get older, that those memories are more fleeting, and I like to capture those.
One other thing too, I wanted to say to Kirby and Terry, the next time they're...
closing in 2 minutes.
Okay. The next time they're looking back is after they take a look and comment on the feasibility study. Okay. And then they'll be back here to give that presentation with their recommendations to the PA too.
Well,
We don't have a date today.
go ahead. Okay, let's give some appreciation to our presenters.
Thank you.